Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get us started here. My name is Lisa Schultz. I'm a professor here at the law school, and I'm the co-director of the Terrence J. Murphy Institute for Catholic Thought, Law, and Public Policy. My partner in crime, my co-director, Billy Junker from the Department of Catholic Studies is in the back of the room, and we want to welcome you to this program. This is a little bit different from our typical format for Hot Topics, Cool Talks, but it fits within the theme of our year of Hot Topics, Cool Talks, which is piggybacking on the Jubilee Year of Mercy proclaimed by our Holy Father. This is the theme for our entire set of programming for the year. You can see some of the topics that we've had and some of the topics that we have upcoming are all centered around various aspects of mercy. That's why we are very, very pleased to have an introduction to the concept of the Jubilee Year brought to us by our Vice President of Mission, Father Larry Snyder. We are very pleased to have Father Snyder share his wisdom with us and his experience with us today. He just came back, as you know, to the university to Minneapolis and joined the University of St. Thomas this past spring after 9 years as head of Catholic Charities in Washington, D.C. Before that, he was for a number of 7 years executive director, and even longer, a person who worked for the local Catholic Charities. Before that, he was a seminarian at the St. Paul Seminary, and before that, director of music and adult religious education at a parish, St. Joe's Parish in New Hope, I think. So he's coming to us with experience of the world and an expertise in particular on some of the topics of mercy and how they relate to the poor that are going to be, I'm sure, of a heavy focus of the church for the upcoming year. So please join me in welcoming Father Larry Snyder.
Thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I hope to do exactly what Lisa said, and that is to give you an overview, an introduction, if you will, to the Jubilee Year of Mercy. So before we actually get into the proclamation of the Year of Mercy, I want to do a lot of kind of background stuff just to kind of help set the context, if you will, on that. And the first question I'd have to ask is, so what is a Jubilee Year? I suspect some of you may have some kind of an idea about what that is, but it's rooted in the Hebrew Scriptures of the Old Testament in the book of Leviticus, where it's very specific about the Jubilee Year. And basically what we see happening here is that the Old Testament is enshrining God's mercy in time. And as we all know that the numbers in the Hebraic tradition are highly symbolic, and the number 7 is the number of perfection, fulfillment. And so you get in the 7 days of creation, God resting on the seventh day. But if you look at chapter 25 of Leviticus, you'll also see that before this passage on the Jubilee Year, you have this sabbatical year. So you go for 6 years, but then there is a sabbatical year on the 7th year when all of creation, if you will, helps or gets to enjoy God's mercy in this sabbatical year. But if the 7th year is important, we'll go 7 times 7, you get 49. The 50th year is the Jubilee Year. And let me just read to you what Leviticus says about the Jubilee Year. 7 weeks of years shall you count, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 cycles amount to 49 years. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month, let the trumpet resound. On this, the day of atonement, the trumpet blast shall re-echo throughout your land. This 50th year you shall make sacred by proclaiming liberty in the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when every one of you shall return to his own property, everyone to his own family estate. In this 50th year, your year of Jubilee, you shall not sow, nor shall you reap the aftergrowth or pick the grapes from the untrimmed vines. Since this is the Jubilee, which shall be sacred for you, you may not eat of its produce except as taken directly from the fields. So again, basically, this 50 50th year, the year of Jubilee, was in fact a time to reset, if you will, the social clock. So if you were an indentured person, in the 50th year, you would be set free. You'd be able to start over again. If you had sold your property because you had fallen into poverty of some kind, on the 50th year, you would have the right to go back and reclaim that property. So it's kind of like a systemic way of ensuring that there was no social poverty. Because on the 50th year, we all start all over with a fresh start. Just the line about that, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, and you are but aliens who have become my tenants. Therefore, in every part of the country that you occupy, you must permit the land to be redeemed. And this is exactly what we're talking about in this year of Jubilee. So it's very, very specific. And again, all of creation sharing in this, resetting the social clock, because we're enshrining God's mercy in time. Now, for us as Catholics, this becomes a tradition of ours in the year 1300, when Pope Boniface VIII convoked a holy year. And every year, every 25 to 50 years after that would become a holy year, a year of Jubilee. And at that point, it was this time of great celebration of God's mercy. Okay, and basically what we see is that at the four major basilicas in Rome, the holy doors, which at other times are bricked up or walled up, are open for pilgrims to come and actually receive these special graces of this holy year. Special time of grace. So ever since then, the 25th and 50th year, 75th year, are holy years for us, Jubilee years. But a pope can invoke an extraordinary Jubilee year. And this is what we see Pope Francis doing this year. He's convoked an extraordinary Jubilee year to celebrate God's mercy. So, having said that, let's take a look at what mercy itself is. If you look at the dictionary, it will give you something like 5 different definitions, just to kind of go through those. Compassionate or kindly forbearance shown toward an offender, an enemy, or other person in one's power. Compassion, pity, benevolence, or the disposition to be compassionate. The discretionary power of a judge to pardon someone or to mitigate punishment. An act of kindness, compassion, or favor, such as she has performed countless small mercies for her friends. Something that gives evidence of divine favor. It was a mercy that we had our seatbelts on when it happened. So things like that. But if we look also at the word mercy, in Latin, mercy is misericordia. If we go to Spanish, it's piedad. German, and I'm sure you all know this one, Barmherzigkeit. Okay. French, merci, interesting. Italian, misericordia. And Hebrew, a little different, rechem. But if you look at the first ones, what is it all? They're all kind of talking about the heart, right? Cordia. And actually in German, Herz. Heart. So the seat of mercy is identified as the heart. The exception is rechem, Hebrew, which relates to the womb. And that's the seat of mercy is there. That's where mercy resides. So basically, what we're seeing here is mercy in our languages is a response to need or to misery, a response to suffering. Okay, so I think if we're going to find out what, in fact, mercy is, then a lot of it's going to depend on our image of God. And so I want to take a little bit of a walk here and see how we, in fact, have come to have this image of God that we do. But first of all, we'll go back to your history of philosophy classes, to Epicurus, because the fundamental question we're trying to answer is, what is our image of God? But if you go to Epicurus, who was a philosopher who lived 341 BC to 270 BC, he said that the purpose of life is to attain a happy and tranquil life that is free of pain. For him, good is pleasure. Evil is pain, okay? And this eventually developed into the school of hedonism, right? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die. But it also then developed into the Epicurean Paradox, which he said. And this would be, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Okay, so this is the issue that philosophers and theologians have tried to deal with and to answer. And why? Because there is this presence of evil in our society. We'll look at, first of all, the presence of what we call malum physicum, or physical evil. And use the example of Lisbon on November 1st, 1755. What happened there was that there was an earthquake that struck at 9:40 in the morning. The earthquake was then followed by a tsunami. The tsunami was followed by a fire. Over 100,000 people were killed, and the city was mostly destroyed. And the issue here becomes, why did God let this happen? Why did God let this happen? It's especially timely when you look at what the day was, November 1st, which is All Saints' Day, and I think our holy days have come somewhat into disuse or whatever, but at this time, everybody would have been in church. So at precisely the time everybody was in church, they were all killed, and the churches were destroyed. This was a huge deal for people to try to come to terms with, and it gave birth to theodicy in the Enlightenment, which theodicy is how do we account for evil with this. We see this earthquake referred to in Voltaire's Candide, and Kant actually wrote 3 separate texts trying to figure out what this is all about. So this is physical evil, which we as people of faith have to somehow come to terms with. Kind of, I guess, on the good points of this earthquake, at this point, it was the development of modern seismology. So we can date it back to the Lisbon earthquake. With malum physicum, we also have malum morale, or moral evil. And here, if we look at incidents like the Holocaust, the final solution where 6 million Jews, as well as 5 million others, were in fact killed, we have to ask ourselves the question, how could this happen? How could this happen? How could God let it happen? And how could we as people of faith let it happen? And I think we're just coming off of a weekend where we've seen this malo morale, moral evil, where what happened in Paris and in Beirut earlier in the week. How can those things happen? And God, what is God's role in all this? Is God standing idly by? I remember when I was in the seminary, and I tried to find out who wrote the book, and could not. But the question that the theologian asked was, in the face of evils so horrible, like Auschwitz, like the Holocaust, how can we continue to celebrate the Eucharist? Now, if you take on a personal level, we all believe there are mortal sins that are so heinous that if you commit them, you have separated yourself from the life of the church, from the love of God, and you should not receive the sacraments. So this theologian was saying, we as a people have committed such a heinous crime that how can we even as a people continue to celebrate the Eucharist? Obviously, it was a nice thought. We continue to celebrate the Eucharist because, of course, we need the Eucharist. But it tries to talk then about the role of social sin. One of the people who I think gave a very reasoned response to all of this was Jürgen Moltmann, a theologian, Tübingen for the most part. And interesting, early on in his life, he signed up or was conscripted into the German army in the Second World War. But he found himself on the front lines in France, and he said that the first thing he did was find the first, and he was actually a British soldier at the time, that he could find, and surrendered because he had no intention of fighting. And he was held then as a prisoner for 4 or 5 years, and it was at that time that he was introduced to the Bible and to faith by English soldiers. And so he always says, I didn't find Christ, he found me. And what he ended up developing is this theology of hope, the theology of hope. So and you can see, we see this theology in the writings of Elie Wiesel as well, that God himself, he says, was hanging at Auschwitz, that there is no justification for Auschwitz, Vietnam, or other evils, that God is in the tormented world, and the tormented world is in God, and that God will transform pain into joy, showing us kind of the eschatological perspective there. For Moltmann, our strongest image of God should be the image of the crucified Christ, who holds the reality and the promise of resurrection even in his suffering. So that suffering is now seen in a whole new light, meaning that it can be redemptive. And in Moltmann's writing, the name of our God is mercy. So a quotation here from Hermann Meyer, theologian. He writes, we have to concede, by the traditions of the life and behavior of Jesus of Nazareth, for the first time in human history, the weak and the marginalized were given a possibility to identify themselves. For the first time, a religion attempted to integrate them into their view of the world, their Weltanschauung, and even to put them at its center. Okay, so with this thought, we see God embracing suffering and becoming the seat of mercy. So basically what you have here in these writings is the reversal of Epicurus. The reversal of Epicurus. So in the question of who is your God, who is our God, I think most of us have accepted this theology of hope, theology of redemption, that God is with us in our suffering, and God's mercy is with us. A couple other quotations from St. John Paul II, the Apostolic Letter on the Christian Meaning of Human Suffering. He writes, in his messianic activity in the midst of Israel, Christ drew increasingly closer to the world of human suffering. He went about doing good, and his actions concerned primarily those who were suffering and seeking help. He was sensitive to every human suffering, whether of the body or of the soul. And he continues, in the messianic program of Christ, which is at the same time the program of the kingdom of God, suffering is present in the world in order to release love, in order to give birth to works of love towards neighbor, in order to transform the whole of human civilization into a civilization of love. In this love, the salvific meaning of suffering is completely accomplished and reaches its definitive dimension. Okay, for me, that's the context to understand the year of mercy. We have to understand the human condition and why God is reaching out to us in a special way with mercy. So with that, let's move on a bit. But before we get there, let's talk about a church in transition, question mark. I don't know about you, but I have lived through now 7 popes, which means I'm really old, right? 7 popes. And what has been good about that is I think I have kind of an appreciation for the contribution that individual popes have made, which is all very different. When you look at Pope John Paul II, what are some of the words that you might use to describe him? One words. Joyful.
Pilgrim.
Pilgrim. I'm going to cheat and use 2 words. Rock star. I think he's the first pope who was a rock star, without a doubt. Anyway, Pope John Paul II, very, very very influential, not only in the church, but in the world, right? Then we come to Pope Benedict. Words that describe Pope Benedict. Scholar, brilliant, teacher. Stern. Right. Okay, then what about Pope Francis? One word. Bold, loving, charismatic, mercy.
A bigger rock star.
A bigger rock star. Okay, what I wanted to say here with this slide is basically you've got 3 different popes in this amount of time, and what was really different is their personal styles, right? Very different. You get Pope John Paul, introvert or extrovert? Extreme extrovert, right? Just loved crowds, couldn't keep him away from people. Benedict, introvert, extrovert. Extreme introvert, right? Never was comfortable in crowds. It was always much more that interaction on a personal level that interested him. So we went from extreme extrovert to extreme introvert. Did their teachings change? No, but their style very much changed. Then we get to Pope Francis, who brings in a whole different style, Have the teachings changed? No, I think they've been very consistent. And I think if you think they have, then you need to read a couple of things that St. John Paul II wrote, including Solicitudo Rei Socialis. It's very good. And if you think they have, you should read Pope Benedict's Caritas and Veritate. Again, I think we see a thread that's going through, leading to all of them. At least that's my interpretation of them. What I'm trying to say here is a church in transition, question mark? Yeah, the church is always in transition, I guess. But as far as the teachings, I think you find that these 3 men actually are very, very similar. And when you get to Pope John Paul II and Pope Francis, I maintain that when they think of mercy, you've got 2 sides of the same coin. That John Paul gives us one side, Francis gives us the other side of the same coin of mercy. St. John Paul II, we know, had a great devotion to divine mercy, and the focus there was on this great mercy that God offers us and is such a gift to us, and the fact that he established Divine Mercy Sunday, which we all know, the Sunday after Easter, basically from the revelations of St. Faustina, that she has been canonized and Divine Mercy Sunday established in the year 2000. From her diary, and this is Christ speaking, is, I desire that the Feast of Mercy be a refuge and shelter for all souls, and especially for poor sinners. On that day, the very depths of my tender mercy are open. I pour out a whole ocean of graces upon those souls who approach the fount of my mercy. He also wrote this, this is John Paul II. The church lives an authentic life when she professes and proclaims mercy, the most stupendous attribute of the Creator and of the Redeemer, and when she brings people close to the sources of the Savior's mercy, of which she is the trustee and dispenser. Okay? All right. Well, with that then, we have Pope Francis and his bull of indiction, Misericordiae Vultus, which means the face of mercy. Face of mercy, right? And it begins, Jesus Christ is the face of the Father's mercy. These words might well sum up the mystery of the Christian faith. Jesus of Nazareth, by his words, his actions, and his entire person, reveals the mercy of God. Okay. So with that, now I want to just kind of pull out some more salient points from the actual Bull of Indiction. Couple of things. We talked about the holy doors that are opened only in the Jubilee years, which are the doors of mercy, and that they will be opened. Does anybody know what day we actually start the year of mercy? December 8th. And it corresponds to the 50th anniversary of the ending of the Second Vatican Council. But what we know is this year of mercy is going to be an extraordinary time of grace. So that's what Pope Francis tells us. And now it's just some of the things to pull out here. May the balm of mercy reach everyone, both believers and those far away, as a sign that the kingdom of God is already present in our midst. It is proper to God to exercise mercy. And this is where he quotes St. Thomas Aquinas, so I thought I had to bring this here, It is proper to God to exercise mercy, and he manifests his omnipotence particularly in this way. So God is always presented as full of joy, especially when he pardons. Mercy is the very foundation of the church's life. All of her pastoral activities should be caught up in the tenderness she makes present to believers. Nothing in her preaching and in her witness to the world can be lacking in mercy. So a couple of practical things then that the Holy Father brings out is the practice of pilgrimage has a special place in the Holy Year, as it always does. And it's not only pilgrimage to Rome, but also each diocese, and archdiocese I think is going to be asked to designate particular sites for pilgrimage, to go there to pray. And typically in our archdiocese, it's going to be the cathedral and the basilica. Doesn't have to be, but typically that's where it is. There is a motto that he's come up with for this year, and it's merciful like the Father. Merciful like the Father. And he writes, "It is my burning desire that during this Jubilee, the Christian people may reflect on the corporal and spiritual works of mercy." So again, really making the context for this our tradition. And I'll bring up the corporal and spiritual works of mercy to remind all of you who went to Catholic grade school what exactly they are. The season of Lent during this Jubilee year should also be lived more intensely as a privileged moment to celebrate and experience God's mercy. The initiative of 24 hours for the Lord to be celebrated on the Friday and Saturday preceding the fourth week of Lent should be implemented in every diocese. Are any of you acquainted with this, 24 hours for the Lord? It's been going on for 2 years now, and this will be actually the third year, and the Holy Father will kick it off, and it's 24 hours where he wants churches to be open, starting on a Friday all through Saturday, and someone to be in the confessional for 24 hours so that people could come and take advantage of reconciliation as one of the aspects of God's mercy. I don't think it was done in this country. I think it was pretty much a European thing. Okay? During Lent of this holy year, I intend to send out missionaries of mercy. And what he's asked every diocese to do is to identify the priests who are known to be especially good confessors who really exhibit the virtue of mercy. And he wants them to come to the Vatican so that he can kind of commission them and send them back as special missionaries of mercy. I know as priests, we all got a letter about this asking if we wanted to identify ourselves as one of these people. Yeah. So it would not be out of place at this point to recall the relationship between justice and mercy. And I think you would see if you're in the writings of Pope Paul VI, much writing about justice and its relationship to charity and mercy. And a jubilee also entails the granting of indulgences, so spiritual rewards, if you will. They have not been identified as to what they are, but I'm sure they will be. And then, as with almost every papal writing, towards the end, they always invoke the Mother of God. And this, of course, writing is no different. Pope Francis writes, "My thoughts now turn to the Mother of Mercy. May the sweetness of her countenance watch over us in this holy year, so that all of us may rediscover the joy of God's tenderness." So, those were the pieces that I pulled out. And now just to reflect again, though, he mentions the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. The spiritual works of mercy, to instruct the ignorant, to counsel the doubtful, to admonish sinners, to bear wrongs patiently, to forgive offenses willingly, to comfort the afflicted, to pray for the living and the dead. Okay? And the corporal works of mercy will sound very familiar to you. To feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to shelter the homeless, to visit the sick, to visit the imprisoned, to bury the dead. All of those found in Matthew 25, the last judgment, except the last, to bury the dead. And with that, I think it leaves us all with a question then. How are we going to observe the Jubilee Year of Mercy individually, but also then as a university community? And with that, it's the end of my presentation. So I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts, your comments, or if you have any questions as well. Yes.
Well, it just seems like mercy is one of the hugest misunderstood things of grasping that we have mercy among so many people, including Christians. So all of us just giving mercy ourselves, these things that demonstrate our love, spiritual acts, corporal acts of mercy, is a way of educating about mercy. So your question is related to the mercy of Jesus. Is that what to do?
As a community. So I think there's always the individual side, and there's also the social side. Are there things in our community that we need to be addressing that maybe sometimes we ignore? But which, if in fact we are bound to be merciful as God is merciful, that we should be addressing. I don't know. I throw that out there as a thought.
I'm sorry, do you anticipate having the 24 hours of mercy available on both campuses? That would be wonderful. Have the priest power to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we could do it on both campuses, and I hesitate saying that when I'm on the Minneapolis campus. But, on this campus, I'm not sure you don't have residents. And at the same time, what I think is you do have a couple of churches, 3 or 4 blocks in either direction, that I suspect the diocese will actually promote that. But on the campus in St. Paul, because we have several thousand students who are residents, I think it would make sense there.
And of course, we have confession here, with daily mass.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
It's been a long time since I even heard about indulgences. It seems like it was maybe dropped in catechism around the 60s, 70s, 80s. And so it was interesting to hear it brought up again. Can you give a little bit more background on what that is? There, if you had to guess
Yeah.
what the Pope is going to
Well,
say about it.
there are probably people in this room who could do it much better than I. But to me, it is more, not so much the negative side of indulgences that we saw at the time of the Reformation, where it was really kind of buying your way into heaven, and basically the Catholic Church was building St. Peter's by selling indulgences. It's nothing to do with that at all, but rather on the positive side, it's identifying things that we do that have spiritual merit. So, and how you quantify that spiritual merit, we tend to do it as indulgences, as hopefully we believe in purgatory, and that most of us are not totally pure and clean when we present ourselves to God for the final judgment, and that there may be a time of purgation or whatever. Again, we're just thinking in human terms because we don't know the extent of God's mercy and what it will be. But, for us, it makes sense that if there is, these acts we know are building up, if you will, the good deeds that we do, and therefore are seen as opportunities for grace. Does anybody want to add anything to that, or? But we're not buying our way in. No, let's not go there. Nicole?
I have a question about about what the Pope is asking of us as Catholics between the spiritual works of mercy and the corporal works of mercy. As a Catholic, I should be doing this all along anyway. So what makes this Jubilee year, is it a response to a particular issue? Or is it that we need to be called to do more than what we're actually doing? What is the rationale for that, if there is one?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is in the personality of the Holy Father himself, in that he, if you had to look at different hallmarks, again, of different popes, different people, that certainly he is very moved by the human condition, by human suffering. The people that he embraces most visibly are those who are the ones who are on the outside, if you will, physically, whatever. And that I think that he is saying we all should be doing this. And ultimately, it's not because Pope Francis does it, it's because it's what Christ did in the Gospels. So I think what he's trying to say is, you're right, we should be doing it all the time, but for the most part, we're probably not. So let's have an intense year that gets us back into the recognition that that's what we should be doing. That would be my guess. Lisa?
Coming here from the law school's perspective, one of the things that caught my attention was the need to think about the connection between justice and mercy. And so many of our programs are all about, especially when we're thinking about forgiveness and mercy, if you think of mercy as forgiveness, it's juxtaposing the policy of the justice in, for example, the immigration context. Do we just forgive and let everybody in, pardon, amnesty everyone, or is there justice to making people go through the right, giving the people their due, the people who have been standing in line and doing things like that? Do you have a sense from your time in Washington about whether that aspect of some of these types, that tension is going to be something that maybe our bishops are going to be offering us some guidance on, or helping us to think through for the upcoming political year, or not?
Well, they will definitely offer us some guidance. Of course, they always have, at least in the past, put out the trying to think of the name, faithful citizenship, right, which very much talks or addresses those different issues here, and pretty much talks about what the gospel and what Catholic social teaching has to say to inform that. Now, it's rare that they will actually come out and say, therefore, this policy has got to be it.
But is Mercy going to have more of a
Well,
role, do you think? Are they grappling with that?
if you look at, again, what Pope Francis said when he had all the bishops of the United States gathered in St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington when he was here, what was his message to them? It was like, if you aren't shepherds, and if you aren't the words in the arms of mercy, then you are not who you say you are. And he's just been very blunt about things like that. So are we going to see it? I wouldn't be surprised that we see more of that. Of course, the bishops are meeting this week, so we'll see what their debates are like. We'll see. I think there, and then Billy. Yeah.
I was just curious, always the debates are, as you said, time of pardoning, forgiven. And I remember the Jubilee 2000, one of the people's, who was this, forgiving kids of the class, history as a church, and for example, down the most big things that happened then. Do you envision some sort of, of course, Pope Francis is always full of surprises, and, but I just kind of wonder, he has been calling the church to look at herself in many ways, and he's correcting, situations even at the Vatican. And do you envision something that he might bring to light in terms of our history? Even, you mentioned the indulgences, for example, before, and that's maybe it's kind of like he doesn't
Yeah. I guess I would begin my thoughts about that by saying, how does Pope Francis teach? Again, if you contrast him, Pope Benedict was the scholar. He wrote amazing documents, as did John Paul II. But we're not going to see those, I think, from Francis in the same way. If you want to see what Pope Francis is asking of us, watch what he does. And he's thinking, and you should do the same thing. So anybody who's visited Rome, St. Peter's and the Vatican, one of the things that I think has become very obvious since Pope Francis became the Holy Father is you see now street people all over. You never used to see them at St. Peter's. I think the police did a pretty good job of sweeping the areas. And now, he's built showers for them right there at the Vatican. So he's done a lot of things like that are sending a whole different message to who is welcome where. And he didn't say to every bishop, you have to build showers at your cathedral. But I think he's saying to every bishop, you need to do something to show that these people are welcome by the church and with the church's resources. Billy.
Yeah, I wanted to get your sense of the relation between the Year of Mercy and Francis's style of presenting his other documents. So I'm thinking of in the Joy of the Gospel and then in his encyclical, I think there's the teaching there is basically very consistent with Benedict XVI. I think you're absolutely right that in the social encyclical, there's really nothing that different from Caritas and Veritate at all. But I think that what struck me in that document was that the Pope Francis drawing attention to how the kind of systemic injustices of this certain kind of political economic order can actually make us unable to feel compassion for those. So I mean, one of his critiques of current neoliberalism is that it precisely kind of catechizes us into not feeling compassion. So I wonder if that could be connected, that, we need this Year of Mercy because a lot of us are kind of like unthinking, stony-hearted because of just the regular practices of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, And the interesting thing is that he's not just talking to the people in the pew. He's like starting with the leaders. He's setting the bar much higher for bishops, for priests, And the other thing is that I think at the beginning quote, if I can get back there, or maybe I guess I didn't get that part, but he does not mean this just for Catholics. He means, and typically, not typically, but frequently, when popes write, they write to us as the faithful. This he means for everybody, because he thinks the whole world needs this idea of mercy.
Contexting last Friday, and I know there was Thursday and Friday, but I want to talk about Friday. Contexting last Friday helped me with the Jubilee Year in either talking points or way of thinking as I address what appears to be a ramping up over the weekend at least. There weren't a lot of quotes of Francis in the Year of Mercy from various leaders running for president. How do we talk or address, I think, the vengeful spirit that we may see growing in light of this terrible, rotten, horrible tragedy?
Right. Well, a couple of things. I mean, I don't think Francis is saying be a doormat, let whatever happens, happens, because he talked about very clearly that, I forget the exact quote, but something to the effect that you cannot use the name of God to justify anything like this. So really taking it out of that kind of religious zealotry and saying that is not true religion at all. But the other piece is his, and he has said it before, but he said it once again, that what we're seeing is really this is the piecemeal Third World War. And this is how it's happening. But nobody else seems to be wanting to really look at it, that this is something that's global and that is far-reaching. But so within the bounds of mercy, I think it's that, first of all, that we don't attach everyone, for example, who's Muslim or Syrian or whoever, with the stigma that you're a terrorist. Mercy is that, we have to continue to show respect to people and not, blame them for what a few people are doing. I think that would be the first thing. But then also to say, why are these things happening? What is the social condition that gives rise to religious zealotry and this? And how do we address those issues in the world? It's complex, it's tough. I don't know, but I think at the same time we can't just say, so bomb them all, which there was a question here and then.
Yeah, so I have two kind of related questions. So kind of going back to the spiritual works of mercy and thinking about instructing the ignorant, I'm kind of wondering what, I guess maybe looking for some context, because there are a lot of ways in which you can think about that. You can think about, is it political activism? Is it being a law school professor? Is it raising children? And I think especially in the context of maybe like ardent, politically minded young Catholics, I sometimes hear like instructing the ignorant as a work of mercy. So I think, so the first question I guess is, what exactly does that mean, instructing the ignorant? How do you discern what it is? And then second, I guess, looking at it more from the perspective of, I guess, like as a priest or a pastor, how would one discern whether you're looking at the spiritual work of mercy, instructing the ignorant, as you doing something that's a true spiritual work of mercy versus you doing something and using instructing the ignorant as a justification for what you're doing? Does the question make sense?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I guess on a personal...
I thought I was following you.
So yeah, so one question is just, what does instructing the ignorant really mean within the context of the spiritual works of mercy? And then the second question is maybe like on a personal level, how do you discern, because there is like, so there's the true like spiritual work of mercy, instructing the ignorant, and then there's also the temptation, or maybe even the tendency to think, okay, instructing the ignorant is important, there's something that like I want to achieve or do, and then just going at it, and as kind of a justification to yourself, say,
Got it.
well, I'm instructing the ignorant. How
Okay.
do you discern that within, I guess, the person?
Okay, I think I've got it. In the first question, first part, I think you answered it yourself. When you made that list of is it this or is it that, it's all of those things. I think it's a very practical thing of giving people education. But then it's also, the practical thing of helping to form people so that, so what you can have an education and yet not really be formed in a responsible way to use education. And I think that's one of the things that Catholic schools have had this huge emphasis on, is that formation is just as important as education, because what do you do with it responsibly? And that gives you the context for making decisions that are moral. The second thing, I think we have to be very careful about that, because we can sometimes hide behind things and we're really driving our own agenda. I think here, for example, instructing the ignorant. Just because somebody disagrees with me doesn't mean they're ignorant, right? And just because somebody doesn't believe in the Catholic faith doesn't make them ignorant. We have to be very respectful of that. But at the same time, we have to make sure that they really do have well-formed ideas and thoughts, but respect them. Does that kind of hit it? Okay, and I think we may have one more. Nope? Okay.
I was thinking for St. Thomas, I didn't go to St. Thomas as an undergrad, but how they're helping students to have or develop or increase their personal relationship with God. Because all these spiritual works and, what the other ones were called?
Corporal.
Pardon?
Corporal.
Thank you. It seems like they're physical actions, doing, and those can help people to come to know about God's mercy. And ultimately, it's between us as individuals and God. When it comes down to the right expression, but it literally comes down to the end of our life, living every day even. So for St. Thomas to help, I'm sure they're trying, doing, but can more be done, or just to help develop that personal relationship with God? Because that traditionally hasn't, you're going to catechism classes on Wednesday nights, late 60s, early 70s. I didn't get that, and it still is kind of pervasive. And just in the university setting, when you have all these students there, maybe there could be even more focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was not an undergraduate here either, so I'm not sure how that's done. I do see a lot of very impressive things that are happening, and even the fact that people have to take 3 required courses in theology, philosophy. I think that says something. I guess my caution there would be is, yes, individual morality is kind of the bottom line for us, but we also participate in social morality. So we can't look at one without looking at the other. And to me, they both go hand in hand. And we're going to be held responsible for social issues as well.
Well, we have to let people out in time to get to their 1:30 classes, but please join me all in thanking Father Snyder for his wonderful work. Thank you so much. Really wonderful. Really good.